Hello, my first time up this morning. If my face is new to you, I'm Chris, the team leader here, and I'm continuing to look at some characters from the Old Testament. And with that little cute picture up there, they didn't quite meet that young, but we're going to talk today about David and Jonathan. So if you want to read some more later, it's in 1 Samuel in the Old Testament. And I talked last week about the differences between David, who became king, and Saul, who was king. And David's known for, defeating this big bloke. And I'm going to figure that you possibly know a lot about that and have heard lots of sermons. So I'm not planning to talk about that in this season of things. But I want to move beyond that. And after that event, David had defeated Goliath, and as a result defeated the Philistine army. And he was brought before King Saul back at his palace. And they spoke together about who David was and about what he had done. And we read in that after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David. He loved him as himself. And from that day on, Saul kept David with him and didn't let him return to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing, gave it to David along with his tunic, even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Sorry, I'm not expecting you to necessarily read it all from that, although you can if you've got good eyesight. Jumping to the next chapter, 1 Samuel 19. I've sort of got a lot of Bible to read, so that's why I didn't put it all up. So can just listen. But so we know that David and Saul got on to start with, and David would sing to calm Saul. But David would go out and fight alongside his new friend Jonathan and won some victories. And Saul got jealous of the fact that David was becoming very popular. And if we read in 1 Samuel 19, go down to verse 19 of that, we hear that Saul told his son Jonathan, who had created this, connection with David. He told Jonathan and all his other attendants to kill David. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, "My father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you, so be on your guard. Tomorrow morning, go into hiding and stay there. I'll go out and stand with my father in the field, and I'll speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out." And Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul and said to him, "Don't let the king do wrong to your servant David. He's not done anything wrong by you, and what he has done has benefited you greatly. He risked his own life when he killed the Philistine, but the Lord won a great victory for all Israel. You saw it then and were glad. Why then would you do wrong now to an innocent man like David, killing him for no reason?" And Saul listened to Jonathan, we read, verse 6. "And as surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death." So Jonathan called David, told him the whole conversation, and he brought Saul to David, and things were patched up a bit for a while. But sadly, it didn't last, and we continue to read on. And again now in 1 Samuel chapter 20, David fled. He found Jonathan and said, "What have I done now? What's my crime? How have I wronged your father that again he's trying to kill me?" "Never," Jonathan replied. "You're not going to die. Look, my father doesn't do anything, great or small, without letting me know. Why would he hide it from me? It isn't so." But David swore an oath and said, "But your father knows very well I found favour in your eyes, and so he's not telling you his plans." And Jonathan then says this, "Whatever you want me to do, I'll do for you." And so David said, "Look, tomorrow's the new moon. I'm supposed to dine with the king, but I'll go and hide in the field. And if your father misses me at all, notices I'm there, tell him I've asked permission to go back to Bethlehem. And if he says, 'Very well,' then I'll be safe. But if he loses his temper, then you'll know he means to do me harm." And on we read in that story. And you might know the story later where Jonathan said to David, "Look, I've come up with this plan where if there's trouble, I'll come out and I'll shoot 3 arrows. And if I send the boy to find the arrows, if I say to him, 'Look, they're over on this side of you,' then come, because you'll know you're safe. But if I say, 'No, you haven't gone far enough, go further,' you'll know to flee, because it's as you have said." and on we read. And later on, we find this time that David again is in hiding and fleeing, but once more this bond with Jonathan's important to him. And in chapter 23 we read that Jonathan went to David and found him there. And this is really quite amazing, considering that Jonathan is Saul's son and Saul is king and Jonathan is next in line. And he again encourages David, saying, "Don't be afraid. My father Saul will not kill you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this." And the two of them made a covenant before the Lord. And then Jonathan went back to his home, but David remained at that place. Jonathan and David had become one in spirit. That's an amazing way of describing it here in chapter 18, verse 1. Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. Something in Jonathan clicked. He watched David, he heard about his passions and his pursuits. We don't know exactly what it was, but I think there was perhaps, a shared devotion to God. They were both young men in sort of similar stage of life. They each had demonstrated a willingness to take action that others were not willing to take some risks for the sake of freeing people from oppression. You might not know, in 1 Samuel 14, there's a story of Jonathan and his sort of sword bearer with him. No one else was going to come with them, so he says to his sort of sword bearer, "Well, you and I will go." And Jonathan climbed a cliff with his armor bearer behind them, and they managed to, just the two of them, cause a rout of the Philistines who fled and were, in that case, defeated. A little bit like the story of David with Goliath. They were kindred spirits. I mean, we don't know who else were Jonathan's friends or if he had any other close friends. But certainly with this David, there was something that really connected in them. And Jonathan's attitude towards David was a positivity, a desire to spend time together, and a great generosity. Like this part here where Jonathan takes the initiative by demonstrating his commitment. He doesn't sort of wait to say, "Well, I like this guy, but I wonder whether he's going to like me back." No, Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved David himself. And then he takes the initiative, takes off the robe he was wearing, his tunic, his sword, his bow and his belt, and gives them in this act of generosity. It's not significant in what they are themselves. He probably had another bow and another tunic and another whatever, but remembering that the prestige and position that Jonathan had in the royal family are represented by these things which he is now giving to this new friend. Such a depth of relationship. Jonathan values having a firm friend more than holding on to fame or power. And we know that David felt the same way. Some time later, actually about 20 years later, it's a bit hard to know how long, 20, 22, 23 years later, Jonathan and Saul die. And on the death of Jonathan, we read these words of David: "How the mighty have fallen in battle." This is 2 Samuel chapter 1. "How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan has been slain. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women." And I've got to say here that some people just twist this in a strange way, which, as C.S. Lewis says, I think just shows that perhaps they are confused about the different kinds of love that there are. You might remember I've said before, we often talk about three, but there's four Greek words used for love. Storge is the love of affection, talked about sometimes as the love between family members, but the affection, the care. Eros, we know about what's erotic, that love which is attraction. Philos, which is the love between David and Jonathan, really this friendship, this connection. And agape, which we often say is the best of loves. But it's not that, this is a hierarchy from lowest to best. They're just different in type. Agape is the love of choice. The love which loves without necessarily seeing anything in the other that attracts you, and so on. And the church has talked a lot about agape, and the world talks all the time about eros. And I haven't quoted C.S. Lewis for quite a while, so I'm going to quote him today. But in one of his books called The Four Loves, he talks about these. And he says you can't talk about friendship, especially friendship between, two men like David and Jonathan, or two women, without somebody wanting to bring up about, well, it must just be some homosexual attraction and that's all it could really be. And he says here, those who cannot conceive friendship as a substantive love, but only as a disguise or elaboration of eros, betray the fact that they've never had a friend. The rest of us know that though we can have erotic love and friendship for the same person, but in some ways nothing is less like friendship than a love affair. Because lovers are always talking to one another about their love. I must tell Robin I love her many, many, many times a day. I don't tend to tell my friends that in that same way. Friends don't generally talk about their friendship. They just get on with it. Lovers are normally face to face, but friends are side by side, not absorbed in each other, but absorbed in some common interest. Like, I love this picture. Like, their friend, we're both really keen to know. And C.S. Lewis goes on, he says, above all, eros, while it lasts, is necessarily between two and only two. But two, far from being the necessary number for friendship, isn't even the best. I'm talking about the friendship today between David and Jonathan. But if there'd been a third, it could have been just as rich, probably even richer. And C.S. Lewis goes on, if you've never read The Four Loves, there's, I think you can find it online as a free PDF almost. It's been around for a while. There's lots you can learn. But this love between David and Jonathan, this reciprocal friendship of commitment to one another, of a devotion to one another, that each found greatly rewarding. Like many friendships, was tested in this situation, perhaps for Jonathan, between loyalty to family and loyalty to his new friend, between the risk to his own life. At one stage, I think Saul chucks a spear at Jonathan in anger at David, who Jonathan's talking about. There's a test. There might be all sorts of other tests that go on. Many friendships are tested in different ways, but great friendships endure. An interesting saying I just heard the other day from Oprah Winfrey, of all people, was everybody wants to ride with you in the limo, but what you want is someone who will take the bus with you when the limo's broken down, when you've lost the prestige, when you are no longer the toast of the town, when things have gone wrong in your life. And sadly, I've met people who their marriage has broken down. Their health has been greatly damaged. They've lost their family connections. They feel shamed at church because there must be some sin behind all this, and they lose those relationships, and the people that were their friends no longer are connected with them. While they were in the limo, it was all right, but now that's broken down and they're forced to take the bus. Who will still go with them? And there's some great marks of friendship between Jonathan and David. There is this respect for one another, perhaps based on their competency and the things that they did. But there's an emotional connectedness. There's a vulnerability, a willingness to talk about their fears and their feelings. There's selflessness. There's graciousness. And there's a humility to accept what another wants to generously give. When people want to give to you, don't always just say, oh, no, thanks, it's okay. Be gracious enough to let them give to you what they want to give. I don't know whether you wonder what pastors do, especially pastors that have pastored somewhere else before. Do I have like a filing cabinet full of sermons and I do nothing all week until Saturday afternoon? I say, oh, what am I going to do today? Or do you actually get up? Do you actually put some effort into it? Well, I set my alarm this morning for 20 to 5, as I do every week, to get up and pray for you all. Sorry, no, I don't do that. Said it this morning at 20 to 5 to get up so I could be part of a Zoom seminar that the C.S. Lewis Foundation were putting on with a guy that I sort of call a friend, certainly we're Facebook friends, and we chat on that guy called Sheridan Voisey, who's doing a whole project on friendship. And so I took part in that seminar this morning, and I just love the fact that it was this morning. Well, it was like, Saturday night American time and whatever London time and 5 a.m. Australian time. I was the only Australian there in the seminar to talk about friendship. But I love that it comes just on today that we were talking about this. And I love this. This is a definition that Sheridan's using. Sheridan has written quite a lot about different aspects of life, but he felt a while ago the importance of adult friendship, especially because he and his wife have been childless for years and years. And recognising the changes that can cause in some relationships when everyone else's life circumstance becomes very different from yours, and they've moved country, they've moved jobs, and friends, making friends, keeping friends, especially as an adult. It's not always easy. And he was thinking about that and realising the importance of that. And when I saw him talking about that, once I contacted him and said, I'm so excited to find out about this, because Robin and I for so many years have said, people need friends. People need friends, they need to know how to be friends, they need to know how to make friends. When I've talked about pastoral care here, I've tried to say, what people need is not for me to get up here and say what their need is so you know it that way. They need enough friends so that without me getting up to say what their need is, you know what their needs are and have a group of people that are friendly and connected and are making that. We can do pastoral care those other ways, but that's a step down and a bit like crisis care. Let's do the friend connection first, but we're not always good at that. But I love this definition that he's working on with friendship. Someone you can talk to, depend on, grow with, and enjoy. And you might have some people that are acquaintances and that you're friendly with, and as you get further along that line, a few might drop off. There might be some people that you can talk to, but can you really depend on them? Some people you feel you can talk to and depend on, but when you're with them, are you really growing together? And there might be people that you can talk to, you can depend on, you're growing together, but you don't really enjoy. There's just not that extra bit there. But all four of these, and I think, these four were visible in David and Jonathan's relationship. Obviously, we see they were able to talk together and share time together. And Jonathan could certainly be depended upon. I'm sure they grew together. They met and became friends, and over 20 years, I'm sure they had plenty of time to grow with. And the way they talked about each other and the way David talked about Jonathan when Jonathan had died, obviously they enjoyed that connection. But some of the things that I heard this morning were just interesting things about friendship, and it's a challenge for adults. In Australia, a recent survey that they did, 25% of respondents said they didn't really feel they had someone they could turn to or talk to. And 30% said they don't feel that they're part of a connected group of friends. I think there's 23% in the UK said they don't feel they have any close friends. These shocking numbers. And as adults, there can be obstacles to friendship. A survey that Sheridan Voisey, if you want to go home and look up friendshiplab.org, not .com, because that's something in schools, but friendshiplab.org, it's just like a holding page at the moment, but they're going to start putting more things on there. And they had a survey there, and a couple of thousand people responded. And when they talked about what were the obstacles to friendship or to making new friends, and the number one and number two reasons were my lack of time and energy and their lack of time and energy, followed by shyness, which was a fair bit less, and trust. And when they asked what obstacles did people find to maintaining the friendships they had, the top one was finding time. That's a bit awkward. But how do we overcome those things? And how do we make friendships go beyond just the feeling of saying, oh, we're all friendly with one another? Friendly moving on to friendships. Well, there's that definition: talk to, depend on, grow with and enjoy. And this is another a thing that I found recently, intimate friends. You can decide and define this, and you don't have to agree, but I think it's got a lot of truth. When you each experience feeling seen in a safe and satisfying way. You are able to spend time together and be your genuine, authentic self, and you feel that they have seen what you are like, and it was safe to let that happen. And there was satisfaction in that, in the sharing, in the working, in the growing together. You know, friendship is a significant thing, not just to read about in the lives of others, but for us to try and engender in our own lives and to foster an environment in which it happens in the church. What if the most significant thing in life for you to do is not some achievement that you tick off as you know, that's a thing that's been done or a position you hold, but it's a friendship that you forge. You may forge a friendship that may be just what is needed to see amazing change in the world. There are amazing friendships in history that have changed the world. Just a few of them. I talked about C.S. Lewis before, the group called the Inklings. C.S. Lewis, J.R. Tolkien, a guy called Owen Barfield, another writer, if he hadn't died as early, Charles Williams. You might have heard of him or know his name more. But you know, there's a lot of impact on the world between those people, just all the things that Lewis has written and all the things that Tolkien has written. And Tolkien says this about most of what he wrote, both The Hobbit, which he sort of did for his son, but to get that published, and then The Lord of the Rings and finishing The Lord of the Rings and getting it published, he said it was only by C.S. Lewis's support and friendship that I ever struggled to the end of that. And if you've enjoyed those things, or you've enjoyed any kind of, you know, fantasy stories that are around, it owes a lot to this group of friends who became friends, who did things together, who shared interests in common, who talked, who helped each other through times of need, who grew together in their understanding of God and faith, and who certainly enjoyed one another's company. Another group a bit earlier on called the Clapham sect. Ignore the sect, it's just a group of people around this part of what is now London called Clapham. And there was a church there, and a number of people started going to that church, and they became friends with one another. And out of their friendship, they realised they all had a passion to see justice come in the world. And together, as a group, they campaigned in a way that resulted in the abolition of slavery in all of the British Empire at the time. An amazing story that was brought about because of the power of friends encouraging one another as an outworking of the friendship. Rob and I a while ago went to see the Loom, or whatever they call it, in Melbourne, where they're projecting all the work of different Impressionists. And the Impressionists were all pally with one another. Again, they were a bunch of friends, had some common interests, and sparked one another on to create this whole new movement of art, which enriched not just the people that enjoyed that, but beyond and continuing as they encouraged each other to experiment with new techniques. Here's another one, Microsoft. There's two guys there, Bill Gates and Paul Allen. They were schoolmates. The one with the glasses is Paul Allen. And we're used to seeing Bill Gates with glasses, but he's the real little one there. And they worked together at the only computer terminal that was sort of anywhere around as little kids, and they encouraged one another. And Allen went on and eventually encouraged Gates to come and join him and start writing Microsoft Basic and then all the other stuff that came out of that. And when Paul Allen died, Bill Gates said personal computing would not have existed without him, one of my oldest and dearest friends. And what's really sweet is the other way around. While he was still at school, in senior high school, he had to write an essay on friendship. Paul Allen wrote about Bill Gates, "We fit together very well." I could go on. Friendships worthwhile in so many ways. But making friends as adults is not always easy. Yet it is a sacred calling, because to do so means we can be more like Jesus, who, as we read in John 15, you're my friends if you do what I command you. And the command he's talked about here is the love one another as I have loved you, and abide in me, connectedness and love, two of the key things for friendship. And he says to them, I no longer call you servants, because a servant doesn't know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. And so there's a call on us for the same. So to make friends as an adult, one of the things that we really need to do is be a bit more intentional about it. When we're younger as kids, we're sort of all often at school or somewhere, we're in the same place at the same time with the opportunity for that to happen. It happens a bit less and less as adults, and we become a bit more self-conscious about a few things that get in the way. And so to make friends as adults, we need to intentionally cultivate the connections. And you remember when I said before, what are the barriers to, making connections? Me having enough time and energy. Do they have enough time and energy? I'm a bit shy. Can I really trust them? And all those things can make us very hesitant. And one reason we can often hesitate to intentionally go out of our way to try and make connections is, how are they going to feel about that? Because, we don't know them, and we don't know what they'll think of us, and they might see what I'm really like, or they might think this about me or that about me. And one of the really amazing things, and if you want to go home and Google the liking gap, it's very interesting. I've only learned about this recently in some studies, but there's a thing called the liking gap, which is the difference between how much we think others like us versus how much they actually do like us. And when they've done studies that find out that we underestimate how much people like us after they've met us. We don't realise they like you. They like you better than you think you do. So if you go up and start talking to someone and go away and wonder how, they might have enjoyed it more than you realise. They might be really glad and grateful that you did that. So be intentional about making those approaches, about trying to foster time together, doing some invitations and doing them more than once, because, you might invite people and they say no and you feel terribly flat, squashed, and you go away thinking, I know they didn't like me. Now I really know they didn't like me because they said no. Yet what are the first two reasons for barriers for friendship? I don't have enough time and energy, and they don't have enough time and energy. So maybe it's just there's not enough time and energy, and that wasn't a great day for them, so try again and again. And I think it was Robin used to say something, you've got to ask quite a few times. And we've found that in our experience and deliberately worked through the no's until there's a yes. Give people a few options. Don't just do it'd be great to catch up sometime as well. It'd be great to catch up sometime. How about next Wednesday or Friday or something like that? Try. And I said, if there's a no, don't automatically go away and say that means they don't want to connect with you. Because don't underestimate, you're more likeable than you realise. And if we look at Jonathan and David, I find this an interesting thing to say. Jonathan was by birth next in line to be king, but he didn't consider that anything, for him to just hold on to or use that for his advantage. In fact, he made himself vulnerable. He offered himself to serve, to make a covenant of friendship with David. He worked to see David do well while putting his own life at stake, willing to face even death for the sake of their friendship. Now, I don't know if you've realised, but that's a bit of a paraphrase. Let's try it again. Jonathan, he didn't consider being the king's son in any way made him better, or he had to be, grasping hold of that. He was willing to make himself vulnerable, offering to serve and be committed to David. He worked to see David do well. He put his very life at stake. As I said again, if anything, I think that's a real paraphrase of what we find in Philippians. in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, didn't consider equality with God, his kingship, something to be used to his own advantage, something to be grasped onto. He made himself nothing, taking the nature of a servant. He humbled himself, became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Wow. I mean, there's so many things that we could say about friendship, and I hope to say more of them as we go through the year and to find more opportunities for us to practice and learn and workshop how we can become ourselves somebody who is better at talk, dependability, growth, and managing to enjoy ourselves and life. People who can feel seen and make others feel seen in a way that is safe and satisfying. Because I think as we do these things, we will understand a richness, which is the love that God really wants to see us envelop and embrace. Yes, we talk about the agape love a lot, and that sacrifice for those that you maybe don't even like and don't even know particularly. And yes, Jesus loves us like that. But in a way, he loves us like that so he can then love us with the love that is connection in friendship, in phileo. As Sheridan said in something else that I saw him say, I don't think he actually said it this morning, but, in heaven, there won't actually be the need for agape as much because there won't be that need for that sacrificial love for other people that have great needs, but the fulfillment of that, the friendship, the connectedness, which after all, what love does the Father, the Son and the Spirit share in all eternity? So let's see if we can be this kind of person. And if you're one of those 25 or 30% that say, I don't think there's anyone I can turn to, I don't feel connected, then make room in your life if people reach out and make invitations, and maybe try to overcome that shyness and make some connection yourself. And if people seem to be reaching out to make a connection with you, try and make space for them. I'll talk at some stage later how that can be difficult because we do sort of only have so many slots, if you like, available, but we can still help. And they're all manner of friendships that are worth preserving. They can be friendships where you have done something together and realise that you're kindred spirits and you have so much in common. I rang a friend yesterday because I thought preaching on this, I should ring this guy. Haven't talked to him for a couple of months. Sometimes a year might go by without us talking a whole lot, but we were friends from school days. We weren't at the same school, but we met through Scripture Union, through ICF stuff. And we became super close friends back in the day when you had to write long letters to each other. And we would write long letters to each other and we would phone up for the 3 minutes or whatever that you could manage in the good old times of that. And he convinced me to buy a guitar and taught me the first chords I knew, and, I led worship for years and so on. And it was great to talk to that friend just yesterday. A couple of weeks ago, another friend who, I'll call him Amos, he was at the same school as I was, a year younger than me. And we both, again, really met through our faith, and we would hang out and ride our bikes all over the place and do all sorts of things. And then, we went on to other stuff. And we ended up both eventually, after other careers and other things, in pastoring. But he's somebody whose marriage has broken down, who's had all sorts of difficulties and stuff go on and felt abandoned by many. And it was very moving to be able to continue to talk with him and have him speak encouragement back into my life. Just recently, a couple that we wouldn't have had much in common with at all. They were quite a bit older than Robin and I, different education levels, different, interests, etc. But we met because we were in a church that had home groups that were based around the closest kind of suburbs in Canberra. And we were all part of a home group. We hosted, they became part of. We became great friends with this couple. We would do practical things together. He would come with his trailer and take stuff for us. When we were overseas, he helped look after our house while we were away. We would go out when they were at some stage cooks at a campsite, and we'd go out and help them serve the meal at the campsite, and then, hang out with them. And we got to a point where we ended up, they would come every week to our house for a meal. And he ended up in a care home and with dementia, and he died in the last couple of weeks. And she rang, and, they're friendships that have lasted for years and years and years. Just the other day, I contacted a guy who you would never think we were friends if you'd, known what we were like. Totally different personality to me, a real hypey Pentecostal kind of a out there guy. And I was pastoring, and I'd only been a year where I was and praying about what to do, and felt God say that some things that we could do in that place were to start a Friday night service with some deliberate childcare and reach all the people that worked all weekend, because it was Torquay and it was hospitality and so on. And I thought this was the thing to do. And then I heard that this church from Geelong was going to send someone down to plant a church on Friday nights. I was pretty angry with God. God, this has been really hard, up to family, moving down here, paid a few days a week, working really hard. And I felt, you're doing this, and I felt God said, ring him up and make friends. So I found out his number, rang him up, and arranged to have coffee. We became best of friends. Best of friends. I helped them as they got started, went to their first service, helped them do music. He's come and stuff at our other church. I've come to all the different stories. And we're great mates, yet so different in so many ways. And all of those that I talked about are people that we felt we could talk to, depend on, grow with and enjoy. Some we had a lot in common with, some we didn't have much in common with. Some it just sort of happened because we were in the right place at the right time. Others we needed to put a bit of effort into it. It won't always be the same as it starts, but as it grows and enriches, there will be a commonality that is worth fighting for and looking for. Because I think it's one of the things that will help us be the most resilient as individuals, the most attractive as followers of Jesus, and the most effective at bringing the lost back into the family of the one who wants to call them friends. Let me pray, and the music team can come. Lord, these can be hard things to talk about, because many of us do say and feel that we have not got the connectedness that we would want, or we have lost the friends that we felt we once had. Lord, I pray into that situation you would come by your Holy Spirit in a sovereign way that would fill that void with your grace and your peace, that your words would speak encouragement and hope, that people would take a chance with that likability gap that maybe others do want and would enjoy to spend time with them and getting to know them. Lord, help us to persist with one another as we seek to turn acquaintances into friendships, and friendships into lasting relationships. Lord, thank you that no matter what we face, we can talk to you and hear you talk to us. We can certainly depend on you and grow with you. And might it be that we enjoy you And might it be that we even realise that perhaps we have this misunderstanding of the likeability gap with you, and maybe you actually like us better than we think. Amen.
Thanks, Chris.